Leah, I'll leave you a moment with Mrs. Bukowska. And I want to go back when they started the Death March. What did they do with the possessions which the Jews left? What did they do with the homes? I mean, you only took what you could carry. What happened to the rest? I mean, they robbed everything.
Yes.
But what about homes, livestock?
They emptied the stores, the homes, the attics of all possessions. And when they commanded the Jews to leave and to go on to the Death March, they were worried that some Jews will be left in the houses, and they set the houses on fire. So if you can visualize it, us being driven with Romanian guards on each side with guns, and both sides of the street, we were walking like in a sea of fire surrounding us on each side. Sometimes roofs or parts of a building would fall, and actually people would die in the flames. And this is how we were driven from city to city. For many days, we left fire behind us. Why they would do that, I don't know, because I would imagine that they could have used those homes for themselves, but maybe it was only the main streets where we were driven that they set on fire. I don't know. But the most horrifying memory is walking between those flames and trying to stay close to my mother and father, us children, especially the little children. Were always afraid to be too far away from her. The memory of fire is it's one of the haunting memories of the war. Now, if it's okay, let's go back to my hiding with Mrs. Bukowska.
One more thing I wanted to ask you. Your traditions in Jewish upbringing was very strong. You never had a chance to learn anything about other religions. And I know I was passing myself how very important it was for me to learn all the nuances and customs. How did you manage?
I'm very observant. I lost a lot of that. But when my survival was in question, that skill was extremely necessary for my survival. I noticed what the Ukrainians did when they went to church, what the Ukrainians did when they buried their dead. Now, I mentioned their dead because it was crucial for our survival to watch funerals, because they had feasts on the field after they buried their dead. They had great feasts, and they were very magnanimous. Whoever came, they shared with them the food, the drink. Certainly children they wouldn't spare. So one of the things we children, the few of us outside the ghetto, used to tell each other, oh, there is going to be a funeral. And that was a good sign. That meant food to eat and to hide. So we knew, and we watched what they did at funerals, and we did likewise. We watched what they did in church, and we did likewise. Once I was with Mrs. Bukowska, she actually tutored me in what I should do when I go to church, how I should cross myself, where do I begin, when I hear bad news, how should I react? When I hear good news, how should I react? Just like we Jews have our way to react, they have their way of reacting. And so I became pretty good at it. But I was never at home in that environment. Whenever I crossed myself, I begged God to forgive me for doing it, because, you know, I used to say in my own words, you know that I'm only doing it because I want to survive as a Jew. And everything I did for my survival like crossing myself and doing all the things that they did, was always in my mind because mit darf gedenken. I knew that I was the last one, because all the family we had were in the areas that engulfed of the Holocaust. And I knew that someone has to remember. And I set myself up as the one. I remember fleeing when I saw danger, and I used to run like a bird. I used to stretch out my hands, and I felt that I would run faster if I stretched out my hands, and I literally navigated as I was running. I don't know whether it was good or not. Maybe it opened up my chest. Maybe it helped me run for longer periods of time. But I remember doing these things, and all the time as I was running, I used to say to myself, you must remember. You must survive. You must remember. I was afraid that all of this will be wiped out like Tiananmen Square, and they'll say it never happened. And I wanted someone to remind them that it did happen. And there was me. There was no one else. And this is what kept me going. Now, I want to say there's one of my very difficult memories I had with this Madame Bukovska, not from her, God forbid, not from her. It was understood that people knew that I was not Jewish, and I was a newfound child for her. She had no children. Her husband was off to war somewhere. There was a druggist in the corner who drank a lot, and he sometimes used to suspect when she was getting a little affluent, he used to sometimes tease her that she's getting well off because of me, because I must be a Żydówka, sometimes. But then he was getting very dangerous. This is when she connected, which we'll come to later. But it was known that I was not a Jew. I was her relative. I was with her, and I felt fairly secure. Until one day,
How long were you with her?
The first period I was with her, maybe a year. Then, two Jewish guards, I sometimes saw Jewish men with armbands, and I knew to stay away from them like the plague. But then one day, two Jewish guards without the armband came to the store, and they were asking something about children. And in my naive stupidity, I didn't see the armband. I thought that they want to help. And I said to them, you obviously can't speak the language. What other language do you know? And they said, Romanian. And I was delirious. I started to speak with them Romanian, and they said, you're a Jew? And I said, yes. I was at that time alone in the store, and they just took me, dragged me off into the ghetto. They were getting ready a transport to send to Pichora. Pichora is the book I referred to. It was a place of no return. They didn't kill you, they just threw you in there. There was no food, there was no water.
It was a camp.
They said that
Was a camp.
cannibalism was practiced, that when someone died, that actually they ate the person. I remember when they opened up, they stuffed us in wagons, like you read about how they transported Jews in Eastern Europe. And for days we were in that wagon, and then we came to Pichora. They opened up the gates. The people that came from inside to greet us looked like some people who got out of a cemetery from the
I want to
dead
interrupt you. You were kidnapped by two Jewish
and
policemen.
sent off to Pichora
From Mrs.
with a
Bukovsky.
transport. Yes,
You were actually kidnapped.
kidnapped and sent off with a transport to Pichora, and they let someone else out. They
So
let
they
someone
needed to
else
fill a
out.
quota.
They needed numbers. Half dead, they needed numbers. I made up a number. When they opened up the gates of Pichora, and those people came rushing at us, they looked like they were mad. They didn't look like human people. And they were screaming, Jeden ratet sie, Hand läuft. Save yourself, run away. Don't come, and this is a place of death. And of course there was no way to run away. before they drove us in there, they made sure that we had nothing worth gold or anything that was worthwhile having, or a good coat or a pair of good shoes. They didn't allow that.
Did they search you physically?
Me, they didn't. It was pretty obvious I had nothing. And I was not attached to anybody. I was just a kid thrown into the transport. I went in and I saw what was going on in the compound, and I was absolutely horrified. Corpses, dead, the living together, the stench, the filth, the flies, the bugs and the lice. It was absolutely incredible. I ran out and I decided to sleep close to the gate and to see what's going on.
Are we in a town?
No.
Or are we
It
in
is
a
on a
camp?
hill with some huts on the hill, and this is where the people were. There was no protection from the cold, no fire, no blankets, no food, no water. You slowly starved to death. The Gentiles would come around the gates, always showing a bread on the wall, asking if anybody has something to their liking, and if they did, they gave you the bread. If not, they walked away with it. Now, I decided that I'm going to die in this place, and it was a question of time, sooner or later. And I decided to make my escape. If I can get out and live, so be it. If I'm caught and killed, so be it. But I couldn't possibly imagine the slow death that was going on inside the compound. So I stayed there by the gate. There were some bushes there. I was hiding and watching the goings and the comings by the gate. Who was coming, who was entering, and who were the people that were doing the guarding. One day, there was only one guard. And for some reason, a car was coming in. The car, one of those old jalopies, was coming in. And he went to open the gate. And as he opened the gate, he saw a beautiful girl. And that his eyes were like he went crazy. That was the moment I took. And I just walked out. No one saw me. There were always a lot of people around the ghetto there because they were looking for things to get from the Jews. Well, it must have been the same way in Poland.
Yes.
And once I was on the other side, I was safe because I could speak the language. At that moment, I said, God, if I survive, I don't want to be a Jew again, because a Jew did this pain to me. I still couldn't pray with all my heart, still couldn't cross myself with all my heart, but I knew that being a Jew is being a traitor, and that I could not live with. I walked, again, my walk started, and I knew my destination was McGill. This was winter.
Becoming
I had to survive.
42.
All I had
Are we still 42, 43?
was a slip. Could be it's 43. Could be, all I had was a slip that I tied around me, and I was walking barefoot in the snow. On my feet, there was an extra sole that had grown, a hardened sole. And I came to the first house where I saw smoke coming out, and I looked in the window, and there were no children in there. And I came, and they asked me who I was, and I said I was a Russian little girl. My parents were killed, and I'm all alone, and I'm trying to find some family in Mogilov. Would they help me? And they were poor peasants. They were knitting things for the soldiers. This one gave me one boot, another one gave me another one, because one wore out, so they had one. They again deloused me, they cleaned me up, they fed me, they put me in the haystack, and they sent me on. It took me months to get back to Mogilov. Bukovska didn't know what happened to me. when I came back to her, I vowed I'll never, never identify myself as a Jew. And I stayed with her, and I tried very hard to be as Ukrainian as can be. But of course, this druggist in the corner was getting very hostile. She was doing very well, magnificently well. And he was very jealous because his business was not prospering. And one day he said, when he got drunk, he says, "You wait and see. I'll bring the Nazis in. We'll see if she's a Żydówka or not." And so she decided to go into the ghetto and to find out what was. She always went into the ghetto for things. As she prospered, she went and she bought things off the Jews. And then one day she came and she told me that Jewish children from Moldova, not from Bukovina, mind, from Moldova, were brought back to Romania by the Romanian government. I fit the picture. She knew by then my story. She knew who I was. And she took me into the ghetto. This was months later after I returned. This is the beginning of '44. And they didn't believe me. They did not believe me that I was a Jew. There was a committee of people. You can't speak the language. No Jew cannot speak Yiddish or Hebrew. You say you're Romanian, you can't speak Romanian, it can't be. They did not believe me. I went back. It could have been a trap, but I believed her. I trusted her implicitly. We came back another time, some months later, and again they didn't believe me. The third time, I came alone, and my teacher was sitting on the committee, and he vouched for me that I was his student and that I was the only survivor of the school and certainly of my family.
Let me go about this again. This is the third time that you're making it from outside of the ghetto, where you're living.
Into the ghetto.
Into the ghetto.
You had no problem getting into the ghetto as a Gentile. I was a Gentile.
So you went in, passing, as
Yes.
as a Gentile.
As a Gentile. I was in and out.
You know by now where to go. You go to the schoolhouse or whatever it is,
Yes.
wherever they have the hearings.
Yes. They were very specific. They didn't take all orphans. They only took orphans from a certain area. Maybe eventually they took others. But at that time, they took only from a certain area.
Did you fit that?
Yes.
And your teacher,
My
your
teacher?
ex-teacher from your school in Herza, was one of the people who was like signing people up.
Right.
And he vouched that you were indeed who you were.
Right. So they took us and they put us in a special building. They gave us wonderful treatment, food, clothing. The Romanian government had sent food, incredible food. On the train, we were in luxury cars, and we were given hot meals and treated so well. It was just absolutely not to be believed. And
By
then
now you've taken leave of Bukovska.
she took me. I went and I told her that I was accepted, and I said goodbye to her.
How was that?
It was very painful. It was very painful. I had mixed feelings about going back to Romania because I knew I had nothing to go back to. And my survival struggle really began again, anew, after I was liberated. It was a horrible struggle, both in Romania and here. It was tough.
Leah, would you explain, the war was still on,
Yes.
and those were Jews which were trying to get orphans out, bring
From
them
Romania,
back.
they bought off. You found some
I mean, this is a beautiful
information.
story, a very human story.
Yes.
Yeah, Yehuda Bauer talks about it in
I never heard
the
about
history
it.
of the Holocaust. This is the 1,500 orphans that were brought
Well,
back from the Ukraine.
I didn't know how many there were, you see, because my group was a small group.
Who
So
were those Jews?
In Romania,
Romanian Jews,
they
the
were
committee of
probably
Romanian
rich
Jews
philanthropist Jews who bought off
bribing the authorities.
Yeah.
So you went on a train with an escort, Romanian escort, right?
We were escorted, yes.
With the same iron guards?
No. I don't remember who escorted us, but they were good to us. They didn't hurt us. They didn't threaten us.
It was amazing.
We were not afraid.
Well, because in Bucharest, Antonescu was in charge, and things were different altogether. The Jews of Bucharest also, on the whole, did not share the fate of the people in the
No.
Bukovina.
Jews in Bucharest, they had an earthquake where a lot of people died. Some Jews were killed in Bucharest, but very few.
So there was a whole different group of Jews who
And
had
they
not
were
been
able to
personally
reach
affected.
through and reach out
we
and
didn't,
save.
yeah. We didn't get
rescue.
directly to Bucharest. They brought us to Dorohoi.
Let's go that
Okay.
journey. Yes.
Fine, now I know.
But that's the point. You're
That's
in
the point.
these railroad cars. You're treated very well. There's food. You're
Yes, royally. Royally. For us, it was incredible. We had sleepers in the trains. Could you imagine? And we came to Dorohoi. Dorohoi, the community, awaited us and received us. And a house was set aside for the orphanage. But in the orphanage, we were treated very cruelly. There were beatings. The well-off people used the children for free slave labor. We weren't really, the burning issue was giving us learning.
Can you be a bit more
Put us back to
specific what you
childhood.
remember? Like, give us some images. I know, I don't want to be rough or anything, but give us some images, like things that you may remember from what it was like to first be back in that orphanage, in a small house, I assume, of some kind.
In a
Just
house.
a few of you, what, 6 or 8 or 10 of you or something? Yes?
No. We were in a house where I would say there were about maybe 30 children.
Right.
kept.
Specifics.
And we were all talking amongst ourselves, the children, how good it will be to go back to school, to learn. We all wanted to regain our humanity. But there was no such thing going on in Dorohoi, in the orphanage. We mostly wasted our time away, or we were made to work, to do the work that had to be done, the cleaning, the washing, the peeling of potatoes. In the house, to keep the place going. If we didn't do something well enough, they beat us. And the do-good ladies, if they needed someone to pit their cherries or to prepare the strawberries or the roses for jams or do the parquets, the floors, they would come and get children. And on the one hand, they were our guardian protectors, and on the other hand, they used us.
Many of you also had been used to a certain amount of freedom because you had basically been your own agents. I mean, you had been free agents.
Yes, that
to
was...
a very large extent. So suddenly you had to walk a very thin line.
But we were willing to give up that freedom for learning, but not for abusing.
So it was not a happy time.
It was not a happy time. And it's something that happened in the orphanage. I was telling Renata the other day, it came to mind, that I tried not to think about. And I can't understand for the life of me why they did it. They checked us to see whether we were virgins or not in the orphanage. And I remember the humiliation when the girls had to go in, and we heard from them, what did they do? What did they ask them? What did they feel? And what exactly was going on? And the fear of all that, I have no idea why they did that. Whether they wanted to establish whether we were sexually abused or not. There were some girls, older girls, if they were, let's say, 14, 15, who were kept by men. And some of those girls, 2 or 3, were in the orphanage. But to check all of the children, I was 12 years old. Because of those girls, I could never make sense out of that inspection. What happened at this time, my mother's relative sent 500 lei to the orphanage. He found me that I was alive and sent for me before the war broke out again between the Russians and the Germans. But the war broke out when I was supposed to leave. So that wasn't going to stop me. The war was on, and the trains were going, and I hitched on trains. I used to jump on running trains, hold on. Towards, again, I asked, which train is going where? And I made my way to the family in Bakou, quite a distance away from Dorogoy, very long distance. The fields were lined with dead soldiers. Weapons were the war was going on, and these trains were going, and I hitched on the trains to make my way to my uncle.
The fields were littered?
Littered with bodies. And I made my way to my uncle, believe it or not. It took a while, I don't remember how long. I had no ticket, I had no money, just hitching on the trains. And I stayed with him a while. I remember he had a shoe store, and I came to bring him lunch, and the Germans were being, like that, marched through the streets. And I was standing with my uncle's lunch in my hand, and they looked so pathetic. For a moment they were I, and I took my uncle's lunch and I threw it at them. And I still remember them fighting over who gets what. My uncle saw this through the window. He wanted to kill me. He says, how could you do such a thing? How could you feed the enemy? I have no idea what went through my mind at that moment. I don't know if I could do it again. But I did. So you see, there was not that vengeance and that hatred was not part of my being. And I must say thank God for that. I stayed a while with my uncle, but as you pinpointed it probably, to school I didn't go for whatever reason, and independence I didn't have, and I knew that there was a very good orphanage in Bucharest. So I said my goodbyes to my uncle and I made my way to Bucharest. And I found the orphanage.
Now the war is over?
The war is just
Or at
over.
least in that part of Romania the war is over?
Just about
The Germans have capitulated?
over, yes.
The Russians have occupied?
Right, but I remember seeing people coming from the concentration camps with their pajamas on, their uniforms, only after I recuperated from my appendix. So I guess the war wasn't quite settled when I got to Bucharest.
Can you tell, just from the seasons, what time of year it was? Like, was it winter, was it summer, what was going on? Do you remember?
It's so hard. I would say it must be late summer. It must be late summer.
So it had to be 1944.
Yeah. And I was in the went to the orphanage, and I was there a little while. I was very happy in that orphanage. They took a new compound that was meant to be for a hospital.
Was it a Jewish orphanage?
Jewish orphanage. Only child survivors were there. They took they made a new wing to the hospital, and they didn't use it. We were housed in that wing. But then I had to leave the orphanage. They provided for me a place to go because the children who were under Russian occupation were sent back to Russia. And I fitted that picture. And I was not going to go back to Russia. So I went to this dressmaker.
I missed you there. Let's say that again.
The
You're in that wing
from
with
the
all
orphanage.
these kids.
Right.
But you're a Romanian kid.
Yeah.
Right.
The Russians
Yes.
found out that there are a lot of children in the orphanage who were under Russian occupation. And they came to claim those children and to send them back to Russia.
Who were originally under Russian occupation.
In 1941.
And so, because you were in that part of Romania that
Right.
had already been under Russian occupation, they claimed you.
They claimed me.
Which means you would have to leave Bucharest.
And go back to Russia. So I left the orphanage to go to this high-class dressmaker who was to teach me dressmaking.
To escape the Russian conscription.
To escape
so
yes,
to speak.
being sent to Russia, I was in this.
You had been there.
Pardon?
How old were you?
You'd been there already.
Yes,
So you were not
I
ready
had
to...
enough of that.
Yes.
This was a very rich dressmaker who was catering to very ritzy people, made-to-order clothing. But I was not to learn the trade. You had to stand in line, as you see now in Russia, for everything. And the first time I went in line, and I came home very quickly with whatever they sent me to buy, because I didn't start at the end, I started in the front. They found out that if I can do that, I'll provide all their needs. So I was in line, and when I was not in line, I was cleaning the parquet and beating the carpets on the line and washing laundry and doing all kinds of stuff. Meantime, I was getting intense attacks of appendicitis. No one noticed. I did my thing, I did my throwing up, and I did my crying and screaming, and when it passed, I figured this is the new me. I had no idea what it was. I had no one to tell. But I had enough with this dressmaker, and I went to inquire on my day off if the storm of Russia had passed. It hadn't, but one of my friends had died, and she was not under Russian occupation, and I assumed her name. I became Surika Furman in the orphanage. And I was, for a long time, Surika Furman. No one knew me by any other name. After being for a few months in the orphanage, and again, the orphanage also found out my talents of getting things done, and they sent me, but I didn't resent being sent by the orphanage because it was for us. So they give me a group of people under me. Could you imagine? I was the big shot. And they said, follow Surika. And we brought back food for the children. But then I began to not feel so well. We were eating a lot. As you can imagine, we couldn't make up for it. And I was constipated. And I went to the infirmary to ask for something to give me for the constipation. And the doctor, a young doctor, without even checking me, gave me an appurgative, kind of like an X-Lax, but it was a powder. I barely tasted it. My appendix burst. I was supposed to go to Israel. A lot of the children, several hundred of the children, were to go to Israel, and I was on that transport with the lucky children. And my appendix burst, and I was in a coma. And they didn't want to operate on me. I found that out later. And an orthopedic surgeon said, I'll die anyway, he wants to try. And he saved my life. I had several operations. To this day, I have a deep hole in my side. I was lying on tubes, draining. And at that time, I remember my mother coming to me while I was in a coma, and they tell me, those who watched over me, there were always someone from the orphanage on guard day and night. They said I was speaking with my mother. She was feeding me, and I was talking to her. And I recuperated. Through some miracle, I recuperated. The doctor who operated on me never knew my name. He called me peritonito. That was my name. And this is the disease, it's peritonitis.
Yeah, peritonitis.
So the peritonitis really saved my life.
Because?
The children were sent off, and the boat was sunk, was blown up and
This
sunk.
went from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean.
Yeah, all the children died.
Who attacked the boat?
This is a question for history to decide. Who attacked the boat?
Who sank the boat? The British?
Was it the British, or what? It could have been just as well the British as
Well, there
the
was the Struma.
Germans.
I don't know if that was the Struma.
Was it
I
the
don't know
Struma?
if it was the Struma or if it was another boat. It could have been just as well the British who have done it.
But you would have...
I really have to go into it now that we've done this interview, into research and find out what really did happen.
So you missed another chance of being drowned.
And I missed another chance. this is why I say that my survival doesn't have to
I
do
never
with
heard
my...
of anyone surviving peritonitis without penicillin.
Well,
it's a deadly thing.
I don't think there was penicillin around at that time.
I will show you. I will show you
believe
the
you.
ugly scar.
Yeah, but
the doctors could not believe it.
I know.
But the good thing
I happen
about
to be
it
a
came.
nurse,
The
and
good
that's
thing
why,
about
yeah.
it came out. I remember before they put me under, the head nurse in the operating room said, "If only my heart were as good as hers." And I was put under, and later on it turned out that she was married to my cousin.
I see.
And she faked my papers and put me into nursing school. And I learned nursing. The hospital, I was their baby. I was their pride and joy. They saved my life. And they gave me a white coat, and I could go in and out of the hospital. And I was such a big shot. And I was learning. I was actually learning in these classes with these grown-up people. I was actually learning to be a nurse, and she took me into surgery a few times.
Because you're still only about, what, 14 years old, 15
By
years
now
old?
I'm about 14, but I was fat, and I looked old. My teachers, when in Canada, about 20 years after they knew me, they said, one of them said that when I was very close to, "Bist doch Tage gewesen, ein Kind? You were really a child?" I said, "Why did you say that?" He says, "You didn't look like 15. You look like you were very old." I mean, my forehead was like a folded accordion. And
Well, of course, at that time we were a century older. Older than our children at the same time.
And when you
We were
spoke to me,
century older.
you didn't have the sense you were speaking to a child. I tell you, when I wrote that letter to Korea later on, I mean, the fellow wrote back, says, "You must be an older woman." Because I was thinking in terms of that. But all of this, all of my survival has nothing to do with my wisdom. It was a hand that plucked me all along, from here, from there, put me from danger into safety, for a purpose. And I find that the purpose is that I give Jewish children the love I have for my people, and teach them to be proud to be Jews, and teach them to be happy that their ancestors were not the killers, that their ancestors helped people live and not help people die. That the more they look back into their history, the prouder they can be. We don't have a problem being afraid, what did my father do, or what did my Zeta do? Because we know that they were saintly, righteous people. And this for me is worth living for and with. Because otherwise the pain of our people is very great. So if we don't understand it, it can drive us the other way. But when we do understand it, we say, thank God we are what we are. So this was, up until now, I survived the appendix. I was in the orphanage. I continued with my learning as a nurse. This was 1945.
You had a problem, though, with your Jewish identity somewhere along the way. And you also found out that not all Jews were saints.
Yes.
Did you resolve that consciously as you think back of it now?
Another incident happened when we ran away from Romania, and we were running towards Austria with the Bricha. I recognized one of the guards that gave me away. And I did not say a word to anyone, nor to him. He was definitely one of the two that kidnapped me and sent me to my death.
Did you speak
He may
to
not
him?
have remembered me.
Did you?
I did. I asked him, "Were you in McGill?" He said yes.
That's it.
I asked him, "Were you with the police?" And he started to fumble here, there, and everywhere. I said, "You were with the police, weren't you?" And he said yes, and I walked away. But I did not give him away. I don't know what made me do it. I did not seek revenge. I really did not, and I do not. Maybe this is why I was able to keep my sanity. I don't know.
So you never become a nurse, right, at this point?
I never became a nurse.
Because your life again will take a different direction. Is that correct?
Right.
So what's happening now? It's 45?
What's happening now in 45, my oldest brother, who survived in Russia, had a wife and a child, and his wife was pregnant, found out that I was alive and sent for me. Only there was no one in the orphanage with that name, because I had been there under an assumed name. And he found a picture in Dorohoi with one of my friends that I had taken a picture. And he sent that picture along, and they said, this is Surika Foreman, this is not Leah Boymas. And so I was thrilled that I have a brother who's living. I had no other living relative. But it was to be the beginning of much pain for me. Because I don't know what the war did to him, but he was less than human. He was very cruel. One moment he was a father, and another moment he was my tormentor. Beat me very often. I can say for my relationship with him, the one good thing he did for me was that he helped me get the false papers that I'm Polish to get out of Romania, because there was no other escape. After that, in Austria, we made our way to Salzburg with the Bricha to be processed to go to Israel. We didn't have anything because we left the train with just what was on us. And the joint was taking care not only of all people, all the refugees, but they took extra care of the orphan children.
This is the Joint Distribution Committee.
Yes. I didn't know, but the social workers were dispatched from Canada to find orphan children to bring them to Canada. I went and I presented myself to them. They gave me food and everything that I needed, but they wanted me to enter the orphanage in Strobel. But that was in a magnificent palace-like building with a school to be prepared to go to Canada. Of course, I wouldn't leave the children that I loved so much, my brother's children. And the social worker very wisely decided to come and see where I live and what circumstances I live. And of course, my brother and my sister-in-law wouldn't hear of letting me go. I was their maid and very, very helpful. And he had to sign because really I was underage and he was my guardian. He refused to do. My sister-in-law told me they'll sell me into black prostitution in Canada. It's a country filled with blacks. I had never seen a black in my life. I didn't know that such people existed. And I didn't know that they're just people like us, like you and I. They knew, but they knew to frighten me. I wouldn't hear of it, but the social worker told me to try and leave their place and come to the orphanage. And if I don't like it, I can go back. But there was nothing not to like. I had a room with a friend of mine, two in a room, a beautiful room, very human circumstances. We went to school every morning. We were given 5 meals a day.
You're in Austria now?
In Austria, in Strobel.
So you're learning good German?
Yes, yes. The German I heard in the wartime came in handy as well.
That's your fourth language now, right?
Fourth new language, yes. And again, in the orphanage, I was amazed. I thought that I had no more mind. I didn't think I would be able to learn again. The little time I was there, they kept on changing me from grade to grade. You know, they had graded the children. They kept on putting me every time I found myself, and I was happy. They said, no, 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 you go to the other teacher. And then by February 1948, I was in
Was this
Canada.
run by the UNRWA?
Yes.
That orphanage was run by the UNRWA.
Yes.
That's the United Refugee.
The
American
Jewish
Refugee.
community in Canada was very split on bringing these children to Canada. They were afraid that bringing us, they'll have to support us in asylums.
Yes.
They couldn't imagine that anyone could be normal. In fact, I remember every train station we stopped, people came to look, just like those Polacks looked at the burning ghetto. They came to look at us, what kind of creatures we were, who survived such a hell, how we look like. Every family asked for children. Those who weren't asked for families were put in orphanages in Canada. I was asked, a family in Calgary wanted a little girl, and they got
You had no choice.
67 pound a kilo me, size 16 and a half. They had 3 sons, and they wanted a little girl.
You came by
They
boat.
were very rich, but
You
they were
came to
very poor in
Halifax by
spirit.
boat, right?
Pardon?
You came to Halifax by boat.
To Halifax by boat.
Yes.
I was so sick on the boat that I said, if I knew how sick I would be, I'd never have gone to Canada. And this incident, I must tell you, our mentality and our value of life. One of my friends had 2 watches. I didn't have a watch. So she said to me, please wear my watch till we get to Canada in case there is an inspection and they shouldn't take away my watch from me. You don't have a watch anyway. So, sure, why not? I'll take your watch. I was happy to have a watch and to be able to tell time. Then February, the sea was at its worst. It was so stormy, we were so sick that it would have been wonderful to see an end of this suffering. They line us up on deck, they give us jackets, and the sea is horrendous. And I figured they're going to tell us to jump. And I said, Rosalie, please take your watch back. I don't want to be responsible in case anything happens in the water. So I gave her the watch. I didn't think of dying, but I was thinking that I have her watch on me. It's amazing how cheap life, or our own life, was still to us. Anyway, we came to Calgary, and
We're allowed, the joint came, according to my notes, and got you signed up and everything in November 1947.
right.
Right? Because it wasn't till 1947 really that you left Bucharest.
Right.
And now it's November 1947.
November
and it takes how long now for you to get to Calgary? Because I mean, this is like the transition point.
February
right?
48.
So in February 48, you actually land in Halifax,
Landed
and
in
that's
Halifax.
and then right away on the train.
On the train with sleepers, with social workers, with doctors.
How was that reception?
How was that reception in Calgary finally?
No, sort of on the way. Everything that you can remember
On
about
the
your
way-
trip. What was it like to see Canada? What was it like to
We-
come on to get off that ship to come on shore in
Please don't
Halifax?
ask her how do you like Canada. Please.
No, I'm not asking.
That was amazing. That was amazing. You should ask that. We looked through the window. I had a very close friend who was a real big tomboy, and I was kind of her shadow. I cooled her. I adored her because she was so daring, and I wouldn't dare do anything like that, the things that she did. We were out the window watching Canada, as Halifax, and every city we stopped in, and we saw the ladies with the crinolines,
Petticoats.
at the petticoats, and you saw small waist, big skirts, and long ones.
They were petticoats.
In Romania, even though I was only 15, I had a very pretty dress that my brother had made me, and a pair of shoes that he had made me to order, with a high heel, no else. And the dress had a flower here, and it was magnificent. I had a picture that I lost, unfortunately. And the dresses were mini, believe it or not, in Bucharest. High fashion was little Paris, Bucharest. The dresses were mini. And here, all these girls were wearing these petticoats with the long skirts that we call schmattes. We said, there are no young people in Canada. No wonder they brought us. Everybody's old. And later on, on the trains, all kinds of mischief went on. Girl, boys, teasing, doing. We were really mischievous. While in Strobel, Clara, the boys were under us, on one floor under us. The girls were on one floor above. The boys were sitting and davening, and she took a pail of water, spilled over their head. That was her way of showing. I don't know.
You wanted to be children again.
Yeah, we tried very hard to be children again. So this was going on. But on the train to Calgary, it was very sad because on each station we lost some children. Because children were delegated to Halifax, to Montreal, to Winnipeg, and the Jews came out to meet them. Till there were very few of us to Calgary. It was Clara and I don't remember if there was anyone else, and the social worker. The three of us were left. We arrived in Calgary in the middle of the night. The whole community came out to look at the two zombies that came. And we were stared at, and everybody wanted to say something, and everybody wanted to touch us. Finally, the Habermans took us to their house, and they lived like in Westmount, a very, very wealthy home, with 3 children, 3 boys. One must have been around 20. Oh, an awful character. And in fact, one day Mrs. Haberman asked me if I'd be interested in Sam. I said I'd rather die than be interested in Sam. That was their oldest son. And there was Morris, my age, and Louis, a younger one. They had good intentions, but they did not know what to do with me. And I think that, again, it's good that I was salvaged from that place to come to Montreal.
How
where I
long
could
did you
grow.
stay there?
6 months.
Did they send you to school?
I went to school, oh yes, I went to high school and then to afternoon Jewish school. And I learned very quickly, and the principal of the school decided that I must be a Hebrew teacher. And so he tutored me for hours and hours on end. I applied to the seminar in Montreal. He knew about its existence. He was a very brilliant, cultured person. And I was accepted. And by August of 1948, 6 months after my arrival, I was in Montreal. I remember coming into the station, and one of the seminarists, Zavi Ettinger, who was very active in the Jewish community, he was director of the schools in Talmud Torah, executive director for a long time. He met me at the train. And here I came with 2 braids this way. I knew very little Hebrew, though I was beginning to get into it. Yiddish, the street Yiddish. English or French, of course, I didn't know. And this young Canadian fellow meets me with a picture in hand. Are you Leah? And I said, yes, I'm Leah. You don't even look Jewish, he says. I said to him, well, that's what saved my life. And then he brought me to the seminar, and the principal of the seminar, a wonderful man who also survived in hiding from Poland, Yona Braverman, he says to me, show me one sign that you're Jewish. So to my mind came, I'm not a boy. I said, how can I show you? I'm not a boy. How can I show you that I'm not Jewish? He was laughing so hard, he was hysterical. But in the seminar, the first few months was very hard for me because I was competing with normal kids who didn't go through a Holocaust, who went to school, high school, who finished high school, and who some of them were taking classes at the university. And here I am. My education was interrupted in grade 3.
Were you in a boarding home?
No. I rented rooms. That was another hell. Rented rooms. People who rented rooms were not exactly the nicest people.
Yes, I know.
They were looking for my $15.
Right.
Who paid for your keep at that point?
I received a scholarship. Everyone who went to the seminar was poor. They each got $15. I got 20 because I had no one. So the extra $5 had to pay for my books, for my transportation, my clothing, my cleaning, my everything. So if I babysit for a night for $1, oh, it was great. It used to be a quarter an hour, and the more they were away, the happier I was. And meantime, I did my homework. It was slavery, the seminar day and night.
Where'd you live?
But I caught up in rooms. I used to look in the newspapers, room for rent, in Yiddish, room for rent. And I used to go to the people. It was very difficult. One room I lived on in St. Urban in Duluth, I had to study, and they were two people who made an X for their name. They were illiterate. They played the radio with such height, there was no way, and it was right in front of my room, the radio. So in front of me was St. Urban, the traffic, and behind me was the radio, and I was supposed to study. So I used to wake up in the middle of the night to study. So I could sleep with the radio, amazing when you're young, but I couldn't study with the radio because it would go into my head. Once they closed me in the library, in the archive room, and they forgot about me. I had
this is the old library on
Esplanade.
Esplanade.
On Esplanade. I had privilege, I must say, that they were very good to me. They knew I had to study, and they tried to find me a quiet corner. They knew what my problems were.
Did you finish the seminary?
Yes, I graduated in 1950.
Right.
And at first they thought that I will need another year, but then my marks went sky high. I begged them to give me another year, they refused. So I graduated. My teachers wanted me to go to university, but I went to school instead, to work instead. I didn't think that I was capable to go to university. I actually only went to university when the bombs started falling in Montreal. I realized I needed French. And that one French course, I always say, gave me an MA, because I did so well that I realized my mind is okay. And it took me 7 years for my BA and my MA. And I did extremely well.
In education?
Honors. BA in history and MA in Jewish studies.
When did you get your BA and MA?
BA, I was the last graduation of Loyola and the first one of Concordia. 2 years took me for my MA, working and raising my children.
What year did you get your
75,
master's?
yes. My son graduated high school, and I got my master's 3 days apart from each other.
Beautiful. I want to take you back. I want to know, during that period that things were really hard for you here in Montreal and at the seminary, if there wasn't like you always had, in a sense, there was always somewhere along the way somebody who picked you up. It didn't always go so well, I guess, with your brother Moshe, but you know, there were always sort of like adults who, in a way, were there for you. Was there any such family for you?
You know that there was, when you read about Jacob's dream, there are angels going up and down. And Rashi says that they were angels. Actually, they were coming down and then going up. Going up and coming down.
You got 2 minutes to finish this part.
Okay, these angels are the ones that I found everywhere, who saved me and protected me and helped my survival. And they were always there. And some of the poorest people were the most generous of spirit and kind. And here I am. It was very difficult to survive the years of the seminar. My friends sheltered me and helped me. But interestingly enough, I sought out Canadians, not survivors. I kind of went into hiding. I was ashamed of my pain, and I don't know why. Guilt was the one thing, and shame was the other. And what saved me was books. The learning. I was so overburdened with learning that I had no time to think. So I think we got the sign to stop.
That's about it. Thank you very much.